It started innocuously enough. Amanda had been more vibrant lately, almost too lively for someone who, just months prior, seemed perpetually tired from balancing her job and home life. I chalked it up to her renewed fitness obsession. The gym had become a second home to her, and Trevor, the new trainer, was mentioned in passing with casual enthusiasm that seemed innocent at first. Routine was our rhythm. Workdays punctuated by shared dinners, followed by lazy evenings on the couch. But gradually, those dinners grew cold as Amanda returned later and later from what she called extra training sessions. Her explanations were wrapped in easy smiles, but the eyes told a different story, flickering with something I couldn't place. The first seed of doubt was planted by Susan, our neighbor. A sharp-eyed, chatty woman with a penchant for sharing every small detail of her life and everyone else's. She caught me one morning as I returned from an early jog. "Jake, you must be so proud of Amanda. I see her at the gym so often. And Trevor, what a good-looking man, isn't he?" She chuckled, leaning conspiratorially over the fence. I forced a smile, my heartbeat quickening. "Yeah, she's really committed these days," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. But Susan wasn't done. "Oh, I've even seen them having coffee after workouts. It's nice she's making friends, right?" Her words lingered long after I walked away, a smudge on my otherwise clear mind. A man can tell himself he's imagining things only so many times before his gut starts winning the argument. That night, as Amanda sat across from me, laughing at a story she recounted, I felt a pang of disconnect, like I was watching her from a distance. Was there something I missed? A smile too wide? A touch too casual? I began paying more attention. Little things leapt out at me like flashes of warning lights. She spent more time choosing her gym outfits, new ones that hugged her frame in ways I hadn't noticed before. Her phone was suddenly always with her, even when she stepped out of the room. She would angle it subtly whenever a notification popped up, a dance I wouldn't have paid attention to a month ago. Days became weeks. I told myself that the foundation of our 10-year marriage was stronger than the flicker of unease growing inside me. We had survived worse. Financial struggles, career uncertainties, even a year when we barely saw each other as I worked long hours chasing a promotion. But this was different. This wasn't a storm we were weathering together. It felt like a silent rift widening beneath our feet. One evening, curiosity won out. Amanda was in the shower, singing softly another new habit. I took her phone, half expecting to feel immediate shame and guilt. Instead, I felt cold as I saw a text notification from T. A simple, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow," stared back at me like a taunt. My hands trembled as I placed the phone back on the dresser, the screen dimming as if it had taken a breath after delivering a punch to my chest. I needed more than a suspicious text. Confrontation without proof would just spin into a fight, accusations thrown and denied. I needed to know what was happening, to confirm if the creeping shadow over our marriage was as real as it felt. The man I could count on was Dave, my colleague and friend, who once worked as a private investigator before joining my firm. I called him late that night, my voice a tight whisper in our bedroom. "Dave, I need your help. I think Amanda is seeing someone." The silence on the other end spoke of understanding before he muttered, "Jake, we'll get to the bottom of it." The days that followed were an agony of half-smiles and hollow conversations. Amanda continued her routines, blissfully unaware of my silent scrutiny. I, on the other hand, felt like I was being eaten alive by a secret too corrosive to hold. Every moment stretched, every laugh I shared with her was a lie weighed down by the dread of what Dave might find. 3 days later, he called. His voice was grave, the words careful. "Jake, you need to see this." My heart dropped, knowing that what came next would either confirm my worst fear or unravel the last hope I clung to. I glanced at Amanda, who was humming to herself while chopping vegetables in the kitchen, her back turned to me. I muttered an excuse and walked out, the kitchen's warm light casting my shadow on the floor as I stepped into the darkness. The air outside bit with the sharpness of a late autumn evening as I stood in the driveway, phone pressed tightly to my ear. Dave's voice had carried the weight of something I wasn't ready to face. "Meet me at my office in an hour, Jake," he'd said. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, and hung up. I glanced back at the warm, inviting glow of my house. Amanda was still there, oblivious to the storm gathering just beyond her kitchen walls. Dave's office was a small, cluttered space tucked between a cafe and a dry cleaner, the kind of place you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. I stepped inside, the stale scent of old files and bitter coffee hitting me. Dave stood from behind his desk, his expression serious, no trace of his usual easy smile. He motioned for me to sit. "Jake," he began, voice low. "I've been tailing Amanda for the past 3 days. I wasn't sure what I'd find, but—" He reached into a folder on his desk and pulled out a series of photographs, sliding them toward me. The first showed Amanda stepping out of the gym, her smile wide as she leaned into a conversation with Trevor. My chest tightened. It was one thing to imagine it, but seeing it was different, like someone twisting a knife already lodged deep inside me. The next photo was worse. They were sitting at an outdoor cafe, heads close together, laughing as if sharing an inside joke. It felt intimate, too familiar. I forced my eyes to keep going, but the last few images made my breath catch a discreet entrance into a hotel lobby, her arm brushing his as they walked. There was no ambiguity in the way she looked at him, the subtle tilt of her head, the light in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Jake," Dave said, his voice a mixture of sympathy and frustration. They met up 3 times in the past week alone. Hotel, dinners, and places out of town where they thought no one would see. I clenched my jaw, the room closing in on me. The anger came first, hot and searing. But beneath it, something colder stirred, betrayal, deep and aching. I had loved Amanda for so long that this moment felt surreal, like watching someone else's life shatter. "Are you sure it's more than just—" I couldn't bring myself to finish the sentence. Dave looked at me, his expression softening. "Jake, I wish it wasn't. But the way she looks at him, it's not just casual. She's invested." Silence wrapped around us like a suffocating blanket. My mind raced through memories, recalibrating them in this new, harsh light. The late gym sessions, her sudden burst of energy, the extra care with her appearance, all pieces of a puzzle I wished I hadn't solved. Dave sat back, giving me a moment. The photos lay in front of me, silent witnesses to my unraveling. "What do I do, Dave?" The question was out before I could stop it, raw and desperate. He sighed, folding his hands on the desk. "That's up to you, Jake. You could confront her now with this, but you need to be prepared for whatever comes next. Or," he paused, choosing his words, "or you could take time to plan your next move, decide how you want this to end. You deserve to control that part, at least." I nodded numbly. The last thing I wanted was to rush into a confrontation and let the anger dictate the outcome. I needed to regain my footing, find some semblance of control in this chaos. "Thanks, Dave. I need to think." He stood, resting a hand on my shoulder as I rose. "I'm here for whatever you need, Jake. Just remember, you're not alone in this." I drove home in silence, the city lights blurring into a wash of color as I navigated streets that suddenly felt foreign. The truth was out, and there was no one seeing it. When I walked through the front door, Amanda was curled up on the couch, flipping through a magazine. She looked up and smiled, a picture of ease and comfort. "You're home early," she said, her voice light. The irony stung. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a tight smile. "Thought I'd take a break tonight." I moved through the house on autopilot, pretending to listen as she talked about her day, a day that included more than just errands and gym visits. Every word she spoke rang false. Each laugh felt hollow. But I played along, a silent actor in a play I hadn't auditioned for. Later, as we lay in bed, the distance between us felt like a chasm. Amanda drifted off quickly, her breathing even and peaceful. I stared at the ceiling, images of the photos burning behind my eyelids. A part of me still clung to the hope that this was all some misunderstanding, but deep down, I knew the truth was as sharp and unforgiving as the night. With each passing second, the path before me grew clearer. I needed a plan. This was only the beginning. The days that followed were marked by a numbing routine, one that belied the storm that churned within me. I slipped into an observer's role, watching Amanda move through her life, our life, with an ease that now felt like an insult. Each smile she gave me seemed less genuine, each touch less sincere. But the evidence from Dave was like a brand on my skin. No amount of pretending could erase it. I avoided confrontation, focusing instead on confirming the extent of what I already knew. I replayed the photos in my mind, her laughter with Trevor, the intimate leaning across cafe tables, the casual way they walked side by side into places meant for discretion. It made me sick, but I needed more than just snapshots. I needed a full picture, not for some sense of closure, but for strategy. Amanda's routines became my map. I noted the times she left, the frequency of her gym visits, the spur-of-the-moment errands that suddenly seemed laden with significance. I installed a small camera near the entrance of our home, positioned perfectly to capture her comings and goings. It was easy to justify to myself. I needed to know. I had to be certain before appending everything we'd built. One afternoon, a notification buzzed on my phone while I was at work. The app linked to the camera was pinging Amanda was heading out, dressed in the athletic wear that had become her uniform of late. I opened the feed and watched as she checked her reflection, a flicker of nerves in her eyes that I might not have noticed before. She glanced around, as if aware of eyes on her, then stepped out. My chest tightened. Guilt clawed at me, but it couldn't compete with the need for truth. I picked up my phone and called Dave. He answered on the first ring, his voice steady and professional. "Jake, what's up?" "She's out again. It's 3 p.m. on a Tuesday, Dave. This isn't just training." The edge in my voice surprised even me. He exhaled, a pause heavy with implication. "I'll follow up. Stay put, Jake." The hours dragged, each second strung tight with tension. I managed to work through the rest of the day in a haze, my colleagues none the wiser to the turmoil cracking beneath my surface. By evening, the message came through, Hotel Bluebell, room 412. My breath caught, and for a moment, the office spun. That place wasn't just a hotel. It was our place, a haven we'd once escaped to on anniversaries when the kids were at my parents'. The significance of it stung, an added twist to the blade. That night, Amanda returned home, eyes bright as she kissed me on the cheek. The scent of her perfume was different, subtly floral, and out of place for someone who just came from the gym. "Long day?" she asked, slipping out of her sneakers. "Yeah," I lied, folding the newspaper I hadn't been reading. "You?" She nodded, a shadow passing over her expression before she covered it with a smile. "Busy but good." The silence that followed was a chasm, filled only by the ticking of the hallway clock. Over the next few days, the facade we shared began to erode under the weight of my silent knowledge. I scrolled through her texts when she was in the shower, hoping for confirmation, some final damning line that would snap the remaining thread of doubt. But she was careful, too careful. The phone was clean, each interaction mundane, each contact a testament to the effort she put into maintaining a lie. That vigilance only made it worse, more calculating. I even turned my gaze inward, questioning what I could have done differently. Was it my long hours at the firm? My obsession with meeting deadlines that left little room for spontaneity? The years when I'd taken her presence for granted, confident that our love was unshakable? But each self-reproach circled back to one brutal truth. Trust was broken, not bent, and no amount of introspection could shift that blame away from her. The erosion of my world was not just emotional but tangible. The evidence piled up. Hotel receipts Dave handed over, grainy stills of her at dinners with Trevor, their silhouettes close under dim lighting. I kept the photos hidden, tucked deep in my briefcase, but their presence loomed. They were like a weight, grounding me to the reality that I needed a course of action. Amanda remained blissfully unaware, humming around the house, planning weekends that felt scripted. I played along, all the while imagining how I would break it, how I would reveal the betrayal she probably thought she had tucked so neatly away. As the days bled into each other, a resolve hardened inside me. The pictures and receipts weren't just proof, they were my armor. And when the time came, I would wield them not just to confront her but to reclaim what she'd stolen from me. My dignity, my trust, and the life I'd built, now fractured but still mine. Confrontation wasn't the answer, not yet. Instead, a different idea began to form, an act of quiet retribution. The more I thought about Amanda's secret world, the less I wanted to confront it head-on. Exposing her infidelity felt too simple, too reactive. No, I needed to regain some sense of control, to rewrite the narrative on my terms. That's when my thoughts turned to Jessica. Jessica had been Amanda's best friend for years, and our families had spent countless dinners and holidays together. She was bright, confident, and always warm to me in a way that had made me wonder, had she ever looked at me as more than just Amanda's husband? I'd noticed the occasional lingering glance, the way she laughed a bit too easily at my jokes. It was subtle, but now it felt like an opening. The first move was reaching out under the guise of needing company. I texted her late on a Thursday, an innocent request to grab coffee. The reply came almost instantly. "Of course, Jake. Everything okay?" I could picture her concern, the slight furrow of her brow, the way she'd tilt her head when she sensed something was wrong. When we met at a cafe that evening, Jessica was all warmth and questions. "You seem distracted," she said, her dark eyes searching mine. The way she said it told me she cared more than she let on. "It's just work," I lied, eyes skimming her features. I'd never truly looked at her before, not like this. Her smile was reassuring, familiar, yet it now held a new charge. Over the next few weeks, our meetings became more frequent. What began as innocent chats over coffee evolved into late-night conversations that lasted until closing. We discussed everything from movies and books to past regrets and unfulfilled dreams. Each meeting layered trust between us, weaving something tangible yet unspoken. Jessica was perceptive. "You're different lately," she said one night, her voice barely above a whisper. We were seated on her porch, the glow from the streetlights casting a soft halo around her. "Is there something you're not telling me?" I hesitated. The truth balanced on the tip of my tongue, threatening to spill. Instead, I leaned forward, close enough that I could smell the faint trace of her perfume. "Not tonight," I said, letting the silence carry the weight of everything unsaid. She didn't push, but her eyes told me she was waiting, that she knew more than I gave her credit for. As days turned to weeks, the line between friendship and something deeper began to blur. Our interactions gained a quiet intimacy, a shared understanding that I was on the precipice of change, and she was willing to step over it with me. One night, as we stood in the parking lot after another long evening, she reached for my hand. It was a small gesture, but it made the world tilt. In that moment, I felt a flicker of power return, a reminder that I could still influence my fate. Jessica had become my confidant, my silent co-conspirator in reclaiming what was left of my self-respect. When she finally pulled me into an embrace, it was tentative, as if testing the waters of an unspoken agreement. The guilt that should have flared up didn't. Instead, a deep, aching satisfaction coursed through me. One evening, she invited me to a gathering at her place. The room buzzed with familiar faces, but it was Jessica who drew my gaze. Amanda arrived late, looking polished and perfect, with Trevor at her side. It was a bold move, one she didn't know I was already aware of. The sight of them sent a fresh wave of resolve through me. Tonight would be the first real strike. I watched Amanda's eyes dart between Trevor and me, her brows knitting slightly as she picked up on the tension. Jessica caught the glance, and a small smile played at the corners of her lips. She walked over, her hand brushing mine as she leaned in. "You ready?" she whispered. I nodded, my heart thudding. Jessica cleared her throat and called out over the room's din. "Jake, come over here and tell everyone how we met." It was the perfect prelude. The room quieted, curiosity piqued. I walked forward, noting Amanda's eyes narrow as Jessica looped her arm through mine. The unspoken confession in that gesture was enough to light the fuse. "We met through Amanda, of course," I said, holding Jessica's gaze. "But it's funny how life brings people together in unexpected ways." The weight of those words wasn't lost on Amanda. Her smile faltered, confusion mingling with something darker. Trevor shifted beside her, oblivious to the drama playing out beneath the surface. The room felt charged, poised for what might come next. But I wouldn't give Amanda the satisfaction of an outburst here, surrounded by friends who dissect every word later. No, this was just the beginning, a subtle warning of what was to come. A declaration that I wouldn't be a passive participant in this betrayal any longer. As the party wound down, Jessica squeezed my hand one last time. "Are you okay?" she asked, eyes searching mine. "Never better," I replied, and for the first time in weeks, I almost believed it. The tension simmered beneath the surface for days after Jessica's party. Amanda's behavior shifted subtly. She was more attentive, her eyes searching mine for cues, as if sensing the change but unable to pinpoint its source. Trevor was still a presence, a ghost hovering at the edges of our conversations and my every thought. The time had come to pull back the curtain. It was a Saturday night when the moment presented itself. Amanda suggested we go to dinner at one of our favorite restaurants, an attempt, perhaps, to rekindle the connection she believed was merely strained, not shattered. I agreed, my silence likely misread as acquiescence. The evening began smoothly, with polite conversation and the clinking of glasses. The restaurant buzzed around us, full of laughter and warmth. I sipped my wine, watching Amanda's expressions shift, noting how she looked over my shoulder a bit too often, as if expecting someone familiar. It was a tick I wouldn't have noticed before, but now it burned like an accusation. Halfway through the meal, I leaned back, fork poised midair. "You've been different lately," I said, my voice casual but loaded. Amanda's smile faltered, her eyes scanning my face for clues. "Different how?" She took a sip of water, the glass shaking slightly as she set it down. I let the pause hang, heavy and deliberate. "Just distant," I continued. "Distracted." I looked directly into her eyes, daring her to meet my gaze without flinching. Her laughter came out thin. "Work's been stressful, Jake. You know how it is." "Do I?" I pressed, feeling a pulse of anger coil in my chest. She looked away, breaking the gaze first. The silence between us grew uncomfortable, pressing down like an unwelcome guest. "Is this about something, or are we just going to play this game all night?" she asked finally, a defensive edge sharpening her words. Her mask slipped for just a second, and I saw the flash of guilt, the tight line of her jaw. I exhaled slowly, setting my fork down with deliberate care. "It is about something, Amanda," I said, my voice low. "I know." The color drained from her face. Her hand, frozen on the tablecloth, curled into a fist. "What do you mean?" She tried to sound indignant, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "Trevor," I said simply, watching her flinch as if struck. The name lingered between us, heavy and undeniable. Her eyes widened, a mix of fear and realization seeping through. For a moment, she seemed ready to deny it, the gears in her mind whirring. Then her shoulders slumped slightly, a movement so subtle it might have been missed by anyone else. But not me. "Jake," she started, but I held up a hand, silencing her. "Don't. Just don't." The anger I tried to suppress surged forward, tinged with something raw and aching. "I know everything. The texts, the hotel, the dinners. All of it, Amanda." Tears welled in her eyes, threatening to spill, but I wasn't moved. This was no time for sympathy. "Why, Amanda? Was it the long hours? Was I that easy to replace?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. The silence was punctuated by the clinking of silverware from surrounding tables, oblivious to the drama unfolding in their midst. She swallowed hard, finally whispering, "It wasn't supposed to mean anything. It just happened." I laughed, short and sharp, drawing curious glances from nearby patrons. "It just happened? Is that how you justify this?" My voice was louder than I intended, but I didn't care. "You've been lying to me for months. Did it feel real when you walked back through our door, pretending nothing was different?" Her tears broke free, rolling down her cheeks. She reached across the table, but I pulled back, the gesture as futile as her explanations. "Jake, please," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I didn't know how to stop." "And now you don't get to," I replied, standing abruptly. The legs of my chair scraped harshly against the floor, the sound jarring. "I won't do this here. We'll talk at home, if there's even anything left to say." The restaurant seemed to hold its breath as I walked out, the cool night air hitting my face like a slap. I stood on the sidewalk, chest heaving, the adrenaline mingling with the hollow ache inside me. Moments later, Amanda emerged, eyes puffy and red. She didn't say a word as we got into the car, The drive home silent except for the rhythmic clicking of the turn signal. When we pulled into the driveway, I spoke without looking at her. "This is only the beginning, Amanda. You should know that." As I stepped inside, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The confrontation was over, but the fallout had just begun. I wasn't sure where it would end, but one thing was certain. My silence had ended, and the game was now on my terms. The house was quiet as we stepped inside, a silence so thick it pressed against my ears. Amanda followed a few paces behind, hesitant, as if the threshold itself would snap closed and trap her outside forever. She shut the door softly, the click of the latch final, echoing like a gavel pronouncing judgment. I didn't turn around. The kitchen was dim, only lit by the under-cabinet lights that Amanda insisted we keep on at night. I gripped the back of a chair, knuckles whitening, and waited for her to speak. Seconds ticked by. When the silence became unbearable, she whispered, "I never wanted this to happen, Jake." The words, hollow and worn out from overuse, only stoked my anger. I turned, eyes narrowing at her tear-streaked face. "Save it. I don't need more lies tonight." Her eyes flinched at the accusation. "It's not a lie. I was lost, Jake. We were lost. We." I spat, incredulous. "Don't drag me into this. You're the one who stepped out, who kept stepping out." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled photos Dave had given me, tossing them onto the table between us. They spread out like a deck of cards, each one a snapshot of betrayal. "There's no coming back from this." Her eyes fell to the photos, widening as she saw herself frozen in moments she'd thought hidden. The guilt contorted her features, and she raised a trembling hand to her mouth. "Jake, please let me explain." "Explain?" I barked out a bitter laugh, pacing now to contain the storm inside me. "Do you think there's a version of this story that makes me feel better? That makes this okay?" My voice cracked at the end, betraying the hurt that anger couldn't fully mask. She took a step toward me, eyes pleading. "It was a mistake, a terrible, stupid mistake. I didn't know how to get out of it." I stopped pacing and stared at her, letting the silence weigh down on her words. Finally, I spoke, my voice cold. "You had choices, Amanda. Every time you lied, every time you walked into that hotel, you made another choice." Tears spilled freely now, her body shaking with quiet sobs. For a moment, a flash of the woman I once loved flickered in front of me, vulnerable, raw. But the pain didn't soften. It calcified, sharpening my resolve. "What about us, Jake?" she asked, voice barely a whisper. "The years we've shared, the life we built, does that mean nothing now?" "It meant everything to me," I said, my voice softer but no less resolute. "But it was shattered the moment you let someone else into our life, into your heart." The air between us crackled with words unspoken. Her sobs grew louder, echoing in the hollowness of our once cozy home. But I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. The distance was now too great, a chasm she created with every secret text and stolen glance. The room felt smaller, oppressive. I ran a hand over my face, trying to gather my thoughts. "You need to leave," I said finally, each word like a stone dropping into the silence. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with panic. "Jake? No. We can fix this. I'll do anything, therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Please, don't end us like this." I clenched my jaw, trying to hold back the flood of emotion threatening to break. "Amanda, you ended us the moment you decided your needs were more important than our vows. This isn't something I can't forgive. Not now, maybe not ever." She sank to her knees, the sobs racking her body so violently that I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But the betrayal weighed too heavily. Without another word, I walked past her, up the stairs, each step dragging as though wading through quicksand. I closed the bedroom door behind me and leaned against it, breathing hard, listening to the echo of her cries downstairs. The sound would haunt me for weeks, I knew, but it was the price she would pay for choices she couldn't unmake. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. I didn't need to look to know she hadn't slept. I found her in the living room, slumped on the couch, eyes red and vacant. The suitcase beside her was packed, a mute symbol of what was already decided. Our eyes met, and I saw a depth of pain in hers that mirrored my own. "Where will you go?" I asked, not out of compassion but practicality. "My sister's," she replied, voice hoarse. "For now." I nodded, unable to say more. As she stood and picked up the suitcase, I turned away, unable to watch her walk out the door. The soft click of it closing resonated through the room, the sound of a chapter ending. The silence that followed was different this time, no longer heavy but hollow. The fallout was complete. What remained was the aftermath, the long, uncertain road back to a semblance of normalcy, a road I would have to walk alone. The days following Amanda's departure passed in a blur, each one heavier and more disorienting than the last. The silence in the house, once a comfort, now felt suffocating. Rooms that once held laughter and late-night conversations were now echoes of what used to be. But amidst the grief and anger, there was a strange sense of liberation. The truth had been laid bare, the worst already faced. All that remained was moving forward. I threw myself into work, tackling projects with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. My colleagues noticed, some even commented, but I brushed off their concerns with forced smiles and vague mentions of just staying busy. Dave checked in a few times, offering a nod of understanding when words fell short. He knew that healing wouldn't come from conversations or sympathy, it had to be earned, step by painful step. Jessica, on the other hand, became an unexpected anchor. What started as a calculated act of revenge had evolved into something more complicated. She reached out after hearing what had happened, offering her support without pushing. "I'm here if you need to talk," she texted, and that was enough. We met for coffee, this time under the glare of harsh daylight, stripped of the romanticized secrecy that once surrounded us. "So, how are you really doing?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. The sincerity in her voice was both comforting and unsettling. "I'm surviving," I admitted, the word heavy but honest. We talked for hours, laughter even slipping through now and then, tentative and fragile but real. With Jessica, there was no need for masks. She knew the dark corners of what had unfolded and accepted them without judgment. It didn't take long for our friendship to deepen into something new, something neither of us dared to name just yet. We navigated cautiously, acknowledging the emotional minefield that still surrounded us. But in the quiet moments, like when her hand would linger a second too long on mine, or when she'd lean into my laughter with her own, I felt the stirrings of hope. The town, however, buzzed with whispers. News of Amanda's affair and our separation spread quickly. Small towns are like that, carrying secrets only as far as the next person willing to share them. I ignored the sideways glances and hushed conversations. Let them talk, I thought. This was my life, not theirs. Amanda reached out a few times, her messages an uncomfortable mix of regret and nostalgia. "I hope you're okay, read one." I stared at the words for minutes before deleting the message, not replying. There was no point in reopening wounds that were just beginning to scar over. The first weekend without her was the hardest. I found myself standing in the kitchen, staring at the fridge covered with magnets and photos of family vacations, birthday parties, milestones now rendered bittersweet. It would have been easy to let despair creep in, to wallow in the loss of the life we'd built. But I took a breath, grabbed my car keys, and left the house, driving without a destination. The freedom in that simple act felt monumental, like shedding a heavy coat after a long, cold season. Jessica and I spent more time together as weeks turned into months. We talked about everything: the past, the future, what we wanted out of life now that the slate had been forcefully wiped clean. She brought out the parts of me that I thought were buried under the debris of betrayal, laughter, curiosity, the capacity to dream again. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of pink and gold, we sat on the hood of my car parked at the edge of a quiet overlook. The world seemed still, suspended in a moment that belonged to just us. Jessica turned to me, her eyes full of something I hadn't seen in a long time: trust. "Do you think we're making a mistake?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. I reached for her hand, feeling its warmth in mine. "I don't know," I said, and it was the most honest answer I could give. "But I think life is full of them. We just have to find the ones that lead somewhere better. She smiled, the lines of worry on her face softening. Somewhere better sounds nice. It did. It sounded like exactly what I needed, what we both needed. The path ahead was uncertain, full of the echoes of what had been lost and the promise of what could be. But as I sat there with Jessica, the weight on my chest felt a little lighter, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was close. It was the beginning of acceptance, the start of a new chapter where I was no longer defined by betrayal, but by what came after. And so, as the stars blinked into view, I took a breath, deeper than I'd taken in months, and let the night wash over us. The past was a scar, the present a choice, and the future, as uncertain as it was, felt a little brighter sitting there with her. We had miles to go, but for the first time, I was ready to walk them.